Thank you so much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third edition of our Careers and Connections series of events. Shortly, I'm going to hand you over to Liz, who is our moderator this afternoon. But first, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists for giving up their time this afternoon. So thank you to all of our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. I would also like to thank our event partners, which is Aura Insight and Significant Insight. And of course, we would not be here without the support of our wonderful sponsors. So please, let's all thank Norstat, our platinum sponsor, our gold sponsor, Elizabeth Norman International, and Premium. We have our gold sponsor, Empower Translation, Catalyst Research, Headset, iView London, XYZ Field, Provision Research, and that's the lot. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. So I'm now going to hand you over to Liz as we're going to delve deep into all the tricks of the trade when it comes to negotiation. So get your notepads ready. There we are.
Hi, I'm Liz. I think negotiation's a really interesting subject because it's something we all have to do all the time, isn't it? With partners, with kids. It's not just about negotiating at work. So after everybody's spoken, I'd love you to think about your experiences of negotiation and come up with some interesting questions for our panel. Because I'm sure it's something that we're all doing, not just in the workplace, although obviously it's a useful skill in the workplace, but also just generally in life. So I'm looking forward to hearing all your views. So just to start with our panel, Charlene's obviously the lady on my right. I'm dyslexic, I'm not very good on writing that. So can we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about you? I think the actual question is, tell us about your journey and where you started.
Right, so hi everyone. My journey started off actually in a CATI centre. I started off working at Cinebay. I was on the phones, often had to negotiate there definitely to get people to not hang up on me. So that's probably where it all started. And moved into operations, project management, and then into sales and account management, which is probably where the negotiation techniques really kicked in. And most recently, I now work in recruitment for Hassan Associates. So still essentially sales, but in a different sort of way. I don't say I sell people because that's not the case. But obviously there's still elements of negotiation, definitely, in my job currently. So that's me.
How did you stop people hanging up on you?
You have to let them know really quickly you're not selling anything. So it was always like, hi, I'm Charlie, I'm calling from Cinebay. I'm not trying to sell you anything, honestly, please stay with me. And then I'd also let them know that I speak quite quickly, which they actually loved because it meant that they could get through it really quickly. And they didn't feel as if they'd be sitting on the phone for too long, so I had to sort of say that. And people switch off really quickly, so if you can get that in like fast enough, you can get people to stay with you. And some people just wanted company as well, so I'm nice to speak to, so yeah.
Martyn, tell us something about your journey.
Well, I guess like anybody, we don't really get into research, we fall into it along the way. I was a respondent in a focus group. I've been recruited by my friend's mum, who is a recruiter for groups, and at the end of the group, I'm not lead respondent, got told to shut up a lot of the time. And then at the end of it, I went up to the guy and I was like, oh, good job, how do I get one? And he was like, oh, I'm actually leaving, I thought it could work for you, and then the rest is history. But again, from a negotiation standpoint, I had to negotiate as to why they would want me at that point. And then after 3 years of being a researcher, moved into being business development as we started to grow as an agency, then went on to kind of formalise a new business process with like directors and build out a whole process for that, account management and all the things. I actually we were talking earlier about how like sales never really, it's kind of a dirty word in business, but actually it's your job in a capitalist society. So you kind of have to go through the best ways, and being good at negotiation and also being empathetic and being able to help people have that conversation, being good to talk to is really important. And yeah, so then developing new offices, new methodologies, and here we are, now on a panel.
Shorful, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, Shorful.
So I guess I started my career as a lecturer after finishing my PhD, where I predicted why children have accidents. So if you're a parent, unfortunately 60% of the reason why children have accidents is the way you supervise. So then I worked for the NHS and government for about 5 years, doing research into health promotion, trying to keep kids healthy, make sure they don't turn up at hospitals and things like that, trying to influence policy, which was very hard. Again, you can imagine that's where negotiation skills come in. I decided not to bother negotiating with public policy makers and went to the commercial sector, where I realized that predicting human behavior was a skill that companies wanted, especially if you could predict consumer and customer behavior. So I've worked for companies like ITV, Adam and Eve, Wonderman, and then I started my own company in data analytics and AI. I'm currently running my third company now, with working across sort of data strategy, data analytics, and data engineering.
And Taz?
My CV scares most recruiters because I've moved around a lot, and it's just been genuinely down to the fact that I think for the most part we just tend to be works in progress. But I started off working in sales when I was at university. It was phone sales. Sold like the first iPhone, I think, many years ago. And then throughout university, I worked in sales, was told I was really good at it, but hated having the harsh KPIs. And then out of uni, did what felt like a really useless degree, and then moved into what I had been coerced into thinking was a really good career for a woman, which was teaching. I came from a long line of women in like social care, education. My mum still works in education, my aunt's a foster carer. And within a couple of years, I got really frustrated at the system, and I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. The children are suffering the most. I used to work on the inclusion team, so with SEN children, I worked in like really deprived boroughs up and down the UK, and quickly realised that if I wanted to affect change, I needed to do it from the outside. And I literally quit with like a week's notice, and ended up going to recruitment. With a company, someone who is actually in this room, and was based in the Midlands at the time. And so I was like, well, I still want to work with people, I want to help people, and that's what I thought I was doing in teaching. But in the meantime, while I figure it out, I'm going to go and work for a talent company and leverage talent and support diverse talent. So went into a company, and they offered to like train me up to be a 360 recruiter. I was like, I can't imagine anything worse for those KPIs for me in my brain. I could do it, but I knew I wouldn't fully enjoy it. And then moved into what was a hybrid model recruitment company and helped to look after their growth and their brand and all of the things that I really enjoyed. So I was focusing on D&I, but doing it through the lens of like people strategy, got the chance to travel, all of that. Really enjoyed it, and realised I was better at the D&I stuff than I was on the talent stuff. And so I've been doing that for the last decade and supporting people and leveraging talent. So that's where I'm at. I sort of work at the intersection of people, planet, and prosperity, is what I call it. Now the mic's really tonguing.
So, again, Charlene, starting with you, what are the key principles that you think are important for successful negotiation?
So I think that one of the most important things that a lot of people don't necessarily do is listening. I think active listening, not just listening, active listening, is so important. Really understanding sort of what your prospects' needs are, as opposed to just going in sort of with a pitch that isn't actually relevant to anybody. The listening, trying to find out pain points, trying to find out also if this person is a good fit, or this company is a good fit to be working with you as well, because it's a two-sided thing. Negotiation isn't just one-sided. And then being sort of transparent and empathetic towards the needs that prospect has as well. I say,
Yeah, no, I
it's
agree.
super important.
I made a few bullet points because I could talk about this stuff forever, but I didn't want to babble. But one of the first things I wanted to say was, if you really want to put your negotiating skills to the test, next time you travel abroad, go into one of the local markets and haggle with one of the traders. The resilience that it will give you, and like I can't explain it to you, but when I look and reflect properly, I realise how much of it has come from just my community interactions and like learning what people want and learning what makes people tick. And obviously there's loads of angles that we could take this from, like be it salary negotiation or sales negotiation. I think it's really important, even echoing what Shorful was saying, just understanding how you can make a company money and how you can save them money, but also what value you're adding. And sometimes it doesn't always have to be a monetary value, or no, let me correct that. It doesn't have to be an immediately revenue generating value, it can be a long-term value. The other thing I would say is that we are in a world where we're just competing with so much noise in every aspect. There are so many different suppliers that do similar things to what we do. There are so many people, social media, marketing adverts. Attention is capital right now. So I think when it comes to negotiating, for me, it's not just going into that conversation, having done a few slides and looking up the company. For me, it's like, how have I exposed myself to that person or that company beforehand? What have they read about me online? Am I easy to find online? The company I work for, are they easy to find? And also backing everything up with evidence. So I was approached by a company when I actually got fired from one of the jobs I was worked in 2018, and that, like you said, we don't choose, sometimes just fall. I just fell into freelancing because I had no option, I was broke. So I fell into freelancing, did okay-ish in my first year, and then did brilliant in my second and third years. And one of the companies that approached me, they were like a global agency, and they said, we want you to come and work for us. And I said, advertising, no thank you, it's not my bag. I actually think it's quite evil, I don't want to work. And so we had back and forth. And I entertained the conversation because I was bought into the vision and the actual person that would be managing me and kind of driving that change. And the tipping point between myself and the other candidate wasn't my CV, which was a 2-page CV that I created on Canva that some would argue isn't even that great. It was actually the 2-page portfolio that I attached afterwards, all the screenshots of testimonials of how people felt. And that's the one thing I'll say about negotiation, is don't just focus on the facts and figures. People will forget sometimes what you said, but they won't forget how you make them feel. I know that sounds really woo-woo, but it's worked for me throughout my career, so that's my bit of advice.
Interestingly, because I've read all your answers already, and Martyn talks a lot about having advocates and being able to prove that you can do a different job, a better job, and stand out. So
yeah, and I think, as we were saying, interesting, like I say, it came at this from like a business buyer supplier thing, but actually we were talking about how you get advocacy when you're maybe hunting for a job and you need to convince that person that you're great at whatever it is you're doing. And there's ways to do that in a digital world. Like sometimes people feel a bit cringy at going like, oh, could you endorse me on LinkedIn? It's like, it will add benefit. It's no different to any agency collecting testimonials for an award paper and going, it's okay. And I do think there is that weird cultural thing where we can be a bit like, is there British shit out here? Me either. I'm like, oh, we're great, come on. But it's tough, right? To get over that hurdle. But the first few times you do it, we're all in here for the same reasons. You can find your advocate in the business who wants to get you on the roster, as for example. But also, speaking to the procurement person, they're all human, they're all empathetic, right? You just, every day, imagine you're the procurement person, it's like, what's the ROI on that? Where's the robots? It's like, they're not, they're people. There's somebody at the other end of that. If we can have a conversation and have a different conversation, understand why we're negotiating is one of the biggest things I always think. It's like you said, ask the questions, actively listen, and then hear what it is. And sometimes those questions get rebuffed, but ultimately, we're still talking about there's a negotiation happening. So if we can get to a common ground, regardless of which way we move, or don't move at all in some instances, the important thing is you've started the conversation. I think that advocacy, and that's where people get, if you say no, and you come up with, well, I know we're going to come on to this, but there is a thing where it's like, if you come at it a little bit too aggressively, that's not going to do you any favours in the future. But actually, if you come at it as a human, in the most human way you can, and have a very honest conversation about it, you're never not going to get a second shot, double negative, but...
Yeah, absolutely straightforward, or just have that conversation.
Also, I might just add to that one sentence. Think of how what you're offering is making that person's life easier. That is and that goes back to what I'm saying about how you make people feel. If they feel like your services or your offering is lifting that burden off their shoulders, they're more likely to want to partner with you because they'll feel as though you're solving that problem. Is that even what we use in I'm based in tech ecosystem now, the number one question investors will ask as an example is, what's the problem you're solving? Is there a need for your solution? So yeah, I think it's really important to bear that in mind.
Shorful, Charlene, Shorful first, yeah. But actually, we sort of missed the question here, which is, how do you prepare for negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what they both said, but I think one of the most important things is rehearse. Okay, so what happens is, whenever you go into negotiations, you forget sometimes what your script is, unless you're in sales and you've got your script in front of you. But normally, especially if you're going into negotiating with your boss for a pay rise or a promotion or something else of that nature, in the heat of the moment, you'll forget the things that you wanted to say. So what I would recommend is rehearse and listen to yourself, because then what you want to know is what kind of questions will they ask. Okay, so I don't mean necessarily record yourself, but just say it out loud. And what you find is that your brain then gets used to you saying those kind of things and how you should respond. So therefore you can consciously decide what to say when you're in the negotiation. Whereas if you're going in unprepared, you haven't rehearsed your script, should we say. I mean, I wouldn't make it like literally written down, but at least the points that you want to get across. Because as we mentioned earlier, if you have value to offer, you should be telling them everything like that. So go to rehearse, and to do rehearsal, you obviously need prep, okay? So prepare for whatever negotiation you're going into. And again, echoing what Taz said, what are you going to solve for them? What's the problem or what's the challenge that you're going to solve for them? If you're going for a promotion or pay rise, then you want to be in a position that you've already done that. Okay, you want to show them, look, I'd like this role because look at what I've done in the last year. I've done this for you, I've done this for you, and make them remember, I guess, or recall that the absence of that, how that would make them feel. Okay, so I would say essentially, obviously, prep work, but rehearse, and literally, if you have to in front of a mirror, do it in front of a mirror. Okay.
Charlene?
Yeah, I guess I echo a bit of what Taz said, and I guess it's one of the things that anybody that's been on any sales training has probably heard before, but one of the things that stuck with me from some of the sales training I've had is the WIFM, like what's in it for me, and essentially a lot of sales is based on relationships, a lot of negotiation is based on relationships, and often you're going into a situation where you don't have that previous relationship with somebody to work with them to be able to do that, so you need to get a buy-in in another way, and as human beings, we're quite selfish. So a lot of the time for somebody to listen, especially with a business case, there needs to be a reason for them to really feel as if they should and they need to work with you. So what's in it for them? It's constantly something that I keep in my mind. Like, why would you work with me? What can I offer you? What can I do for you? And what can you do for me? Or what are the reasons for us to be doing this together? And then often we'll find that's the way that somebody will come around to working with you.
And I think from as a kind of marriage of those two things, right? You're going to have a diverse set of people who have different outcomes for that. And I think that scenario planning element of like knowing where this might go is sometimes you feel quite limited in what maybe you've only thought about it in a certain way. So what I tend to do is if there's other people within the business, maybe in the finance team or a project management team, you go and talk to them and say, when was the last time you were in a sort of negotiation situation like this, or any situation like this? And they might have some gold inside there that you just didn't know existed, because people don't really tend to talk about this kind of stuff at work, right? Too busy in the day-to-day. But actually, if you just sit and have a conversation with somebody, then you're going to learn something somewhere. And I think that can be quite helpful as well.
And actually in your written things, you all talked a lot about doing research, and so that you're going in prepared, so that you know, I don't know what other people are charging, talking about from a careers point of view, you know what salaries are being advertised, and what sort of skills people expect at those salaries. Because a lot of people, I find, sort of come into a salary negotiation and it's what they want to fund their lifestyle. It's like, well, it's very nice, but actually it's not the appropriate rate for the market. So doing your research, I presume when you're selling to research agencies, you want to know what other agencies are selling, what they're roughly selling it for.
Yeah. Oh, you want to? Okay. Well, yeah, I think there's that. Because obviously, if the agency selling to a client, they've come to us. They sometimes won't reveal what budget they have, or they won't reveal what the samples. They want you to come at them with that. But when you get to the negotiating phase after you present, it's a great idea, love it. But actually, the cost is a little bit too high. You need to know, like we've talked about, where your bottom line is, but also what are negotiables and non-negotiables within that. And I think it's those value adds. It's the things that might not have already come up in the conversation. Maybe you just didn't overtly put them in the proposal because to you they're hygiene factors. You wouldn't even thought about it. So asking the questions of like, why are we negotiating for one, or what we're negotiating around, maybe not that bluntly, but also like what you see in the other proposals that you really like that we might not have added in. Maybe we were offering that, or maybe it's I don't know, like whatever it might be. It's again, it's always comes back to that asking the questions, but also doing your research is the build of that, and it's knowing what the broader goals of the business is as well. I think that happens on both sides. Like you want to know what's the 2030 vision strategy for the overall ranks. If you're referring to that, shows that you're showing up and paying attention from the outset. You're building towards that broader goal. Nobody's doing a research project just for, I'm going to say something, for the hell of it. Because it's all adding value. And I think to your point, in the tech space, like everybody knows that Meta's philosophy on research is what's the value to the business and to the end user, right? It becomes the same thing. Yeah.
Taz, have you got anything to add? You've sort of been dancing around a bit.
I didn't mean to overstep because I'm sure for wanted to add something, but Martyn's point reminded me that I like to give my stakeholders a buffet, like a menu. I don't like saying like, this is what I offer and this is what the price is, because for those of you that might have, I don't know if anyone in the room has had formal sales training, or has been rejected enough times to know what the human psychology is around like buying. But usually when you give people 3 options, you give them like rock bottom basic price, like the bronze package, and then you offer the middle one, which is the one you want them to take, which is your ideal sort of package, ideal client, ideal time frame, ideal outputs. And then you've got like premium or like gold package. The likelihood is nobody wants the bare bones. They don't want the most basic service, and they don't also want to be known as the one that picked the most expensive package. So the basic psychology around selling is that they're likely to go for the middle one. And I tend to offer like a suite of options to clients so that they feel like they're getting value and that they have autonomy over that process rather than being pushed. Which is, has worked incredibly for the BD team that I'm on now for the company I work for, so I support on their contracts, and we work with local government in sustainability. So those procurement conversations sometimes take a year. So not only are we building the relationships, we're also saying there's 10 options for you to pick from that we can work with you. And the likelihood is they'll block out 2 or 3, 6-figure to mid-6-figure sort of contracts, because it's the way we made them feel. We allowed them to have, we gave them the illusion of control over the situation. So that's my bit to put in. It's all psychology.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how that would relate to negotiating salary, because you wouldn't want to, you don't go in, you can have me at the rock bottom price or at the gold price. Maybe you're making it clear that you have a range and it depends on other benefits and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the salary one, there should be things that you should be able to swap out. Okay, so you've got to work out what's of value to you. So you might decide that actually if they offer me a mini MBA and that would help me in 2 years' time for another job, then one of the things that throughout my career, and I've hired a lot of people, is whenever we sit in these pay rise and promotions, I always say, look, as an employer, I'm not responsible for your career. You are responsible for your career. You decide which direction, where you want to go. I'm not going to sit here and say, work with us for 10 years and you'll end up at the lead analyst range, whatever. So if you are going into a negotiation for salaries and instead of giving a bronze, silver and gold, decide what you could swap out, okay? And make sure that the things that you are swapping out add value to your career. It doesn't have to add value to the company, okay? Because you're sacrificing on the short term of getting cash for something that you hope you'll get in the future. The other thing I would advise is never accept promises of the future either, okay? Whether it's as a supplier to a client where they say, oh, give us a discount here and we'll give you projects later on. It doesn't work, okay? Because you've lost the leverage you have now. Same as when you go into a negotiation with an employer for pay rise and promotion. don't accept promises of the future. Things change, people change, okay? And companies do not have to honour promises, okay? Everything should be in writing and should be concrete in terms of what you're accepting now.
Yeah, no, I think you've got to look after number one. Over the years, I've seen so many people, to be honest, shafted by employers. You have to make sure that you do look after number one. The next question is the most exciting for me, which is, what mistakes have you made? Trust, you want to start?
I took the mic, so I was going to add to the previous one, but it was kind of in that next question anyway. When a negotiation hasn't gone according to plan, God, what mistakes have I made? I'll tell you what the biggest lesson that I've learned is never be the one to, well, it depends. If this isn't a salary negotiation, no, the biggest mistake I made was stating my number first, and then that translated back into like the sales world as well, when if I state the number first, I almost feel like you lose, and that won't always work because you'll have pushy clients or you'll have a pushy manager that wants to know what the bare minimum is that you'll work for and sell your soul for. So for me, I would say that's the biggest mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. That has been my biggest mistake. When I moved from the public sector, where pay grades are very transparent, and you know what level you're going in, and I went to the private sector, I was offered a role that was 30% less than the people in that company were being paid, obviously much more than what I was getting paid in the public sector. And they said it on the phone, and working with a recruiter, you get sort of pressured and thinking, but I'm thinking in my head, I'm getting paid more. So I was valuing it from what I thought. So for me, it was fine. It's just that once you then start, you become slightly demoralised because you realise you can't really negotiate after you've started. And when people on equivalent roles are getting much more, you end up then deciding, do you wait your time for the negotiation or you just jump? And unfortunately, I jumped. So.
But I would say there that the important thing is doing research.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know how to do that.
No, you should. It's to know that actually your value was higher, because I think it's actually quite important in salary negotiations to be relatively transparent. I think nothing irritates an employer more than they sort of think that you're going to happily accept 40,000, and actually when they make the offer, the candidate says, oh, no, I'm looking for 45. That really irritates employers. So I think you do have to be relatively transparent, but before you set your stall out, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, because the challenge is if you go in the expectation that, you know, especially with employers, that they will do the right thing, and I've been on the other side, it's not the case, okay? You are maximising your budget, you're trying to get away what you can do. I mean, it is very short-termism, because then the person will find out, and eventually, more often than not, people do leave. That's what I've done. So what we normally do is whenever we do salaries, we actually tell them, look, based on your CV and your skill set, this is where we're putting you in. Do you want to continue with the interview? And that way, you know, both parties know, because sometimes you can't negotiate outside the budget. But in this instance, like I said, I just thought they would do the right thing, because in public sector, it is very transparent. You see the pay grades, you see what levels everybody's at, what you need to get at what level. I didn't realise in the commercial sector, which I later discovered later on, you can negotiate huge pay rises. You know, so.
I have one sentence to that before it goes to Martyn. Can we also put the onus on transparency on the companies as well? Because my experience of it is, if you're being told not to discuss your salary with other people, it probably means you're being screwed over or someone else is being screwed over and they're not paid fair. And I know that sounds really controversial. I have never been in a job where I've been told to not discuss my salary because they can't put that in writing. It's not legally binding. I have always discussed my salary with other people and found out on 4 occasions I was being underpaid because I was a woman or a person of colour, whatever you want to call it. And I've always gone on either moved jobs or negotiated a higher salary. So the privacy is not there to protect you, it's there to protect the company. And we need to put the onus on companies for that a bit more.
We had a very interesting example. It's a very large manufacturer, and they said to us that they did not want to know the salary that the candidates are on. So every candidate we send them, they have no idea what salary the candidate's on. But they offer what they feel is the appropriate rate for that individual. And it has resulted in a lot of equalisation, and women have all ended up with big pay rises. because they haven't ever said, oh, we're earning X, Y, Z, which is normally less than men. And the companies don't realise that, and they equalise the salary, and it's been really impressive.
That's a really nice way of doing it. It's interesting you said like people are selfish, and I'm going to hand this to you because you're in recruitment, we're on recruitment topic. I've got a more different story about where I screwed up, but I think that everybody, you go into it, and the recruiter calls you, you're talking about the role, and like, yeah, what's your current package? Everybody's inflating that figure. Of course they are, because you don't want what you're on now, you want what you're going to get at the new place. So I think it just happens that happens on both sides, right? So the company's not being transparent, you're technically not going to be transparent. You're like, I'm going to push for an extra 10 grand, go for it, see what happens, negotiate it down if you have to, but never take the first price if you want to go your way.
I think, yeah, I feel similar. It's like if when I was younger and I wanted money from my dad, I'd say, Daddy, I need £200. Knowing in my mind I need 75, of course he'll come down, but you know, occasionally I was surprised and I had a little bit extra to do something else. And I think the same applies in life in general, you know, it's not to say don't go in with something completely unrealistic because you just look like an arsehole. Or someone that just has no awareness of the industry and the value, and that's what we said earlier and what Liz mentioned as well, that research is really important. So understanding what you can bring, what value you can add, that you deserve this rate and get paid, you know, on the sort of equal level with other people doing the same thing as you. So yeah.
I'm not going to let you get away without talking about
my mistakes. My mistake. Well, I was speaking more about my mistakes from, it was more from a sales perspective. And I think when I first started, it would be more me thinking that I could just get by on gift of the gab. And yeah, you can to an extent, but your results will always be better if you are prepared and if you do that research and if you go like, now if I'm speaking to somebody or when I was going to a new prospect, I would do seriously extensive research to the point where it could be a bit obsessive. Research who stalk sort of who I'm actually speaking to as well. Just because you know you want to give somebody an opportunity to obviously speak to you and tell you sort of about their company, but they also want to know that you're invested, that you care, that you've put that effort in to make sure that it's actually a good fit in the first place. And I definitely initially fell short in that, not being prepared, and learned very quickly that was not the way to hit my KPIs and to get my commission. So yeah, that's why I'd say the research is.
Martyn, I don't think we've heard your mistake either, have we?
No.
I thought you got away with it.
Well, I guess it comes back to everything. It's part of doing your research was also knowing your bottom line was this one. So, and also knowing your value was part of that. So, I probably about 3 or 4 years into having set up the business development team, and it was kind of just me, and I've been left alone to do this reverse auction. And I hadn't really asked anyone what our bottom line was, but I was like, we're going to reduce my price, and we're going to keep resetting like it's a terrible eBay-based situation. I was like, we're not on this race to the bottom. So I was like, surely all the other agencies are thinking the same thing. The auction starts, it's all anonymous. I reduced the price by £1. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Surely everyone's going to hold it strong. Like, your work's your work. You put the value in, it's there, it's a procurement exercise. The price started going down and going down. I was like, shit. Like, okay, is this what we're supposed to do? There was no one around to help, and I hadn't done what I'd said was one of the important things is ask other people around you. So we lost the job because they were racing to the bottom. And I was like, honestly, I had a conversation with our CEO about it afterwards, and he was like, well, no, you did the right thing. Like, that was our value, that was our price, and maybe we don't want to work with that client in that instance. And it's like,
is that a mistake?
You don't see it around so much anymore, I can tell you that. I haven't done one since then, I don't think. But yeah, I don't think it was a mistake. And it was kind of funny when you were talking, I think there's a movie quote for everything, but I've got Zoolander stuck in my head now. Screw them, hold out for more.
I said my mistake.
What's your mistake?
Oh crikey, I've got so many. I've got 3 people from my office, they could tell you lots of mistakes.
Are they going to get a promotion?
Yeah. Salary negotiations upcoming. Moving swiftly on.
Can you, well, to sum it up, can you all give us a tip to effectively negotiate? So what would your tip be?
Kick it off. I mean, I wrote it down, reading from notes, fail to prepare, prepare to fail, right? Like the old adage is there, but you've really got to put that effort in. I think doing the research and just thinking things through with from various different angles is, you're going to feel more confident going into it. So I think that's mine. Statement.
Johnny, your tip.
I had quite a few points, so I think that the one, I'll say two. So one of them for me is building trust, not just going into somebody and BSing them, having that genuine rapport, really finding out about them, all the things we spoke about before, but building that trust, because essentially you buy from people that you trust. And I would say the other thing for me is creating a win-win situation. So that scenario where both of you can win and finding out where that is and sort of following through on it. Keeping promises too. Okay, I've said three.
You were the same. I was like, it's one of those hygiene factors where I said it in my own head. I was like, oh yeah, of course, it's normal, but be human.
Again, I mean, echoing what they said, but I think that the two that I'd like to probably say is, one is set the expectation, whether it's a salary negotiation or whether it's a client-supplier relationship where you're going to negotiate price. If you put a meeting in the diary, set the expectation. There have been so many times I've had employees put a meeting in the diary and I just think it's a regular catch-up. They turn up expecting a pay rise or a promotion or something, and I'm unprepared on the other side. That way I can't have a meaningful discussion with you because I've not done my prep. And so if you are going in for a pay rise, promotion, make sure if you are the one instigating the meeting, set the agenda, let them know that you're coming in because you want something, okay? The second tip I'll give you, especially if you work for large companies, they'll sometimes say there's no budget, there is always budget. I've seen it, okay? So even if they make a loss as a company, there is always budget for pay rises, and people who persevere and who can add value will always get those pay rises. So don't accept the statement that, sorry, that we've made a loss this year, there's no budget. There is always budget.
When people used to tell me they couldn't pay for stuff, I'd be like, what's the alcohol budget for the event? Surprisingly, there was like a 4-figure, 5-figure thing on that. I feel like, because you've mentioned like the short-term stuff for negotiation, I'll give a bit of advice on the long-term stuff, and that is to build a community and tribe around the work that you do. And the reason I feel I can say that with my chest is because in the 3 years that I freelanced prior to going to a global agency, I didn't do any business development. And that was solely down to all the inbound I had was from people that I had built relationships with, even in my social life, who were just very aware of what I did for work in D&I. And that will act as your testimonial, because every industry is big in terms of numbers, but really small in terms of who's talking to who. And people know each other and people talk. And I think the more that you can build your reputation when nobody's looking, the more that it will speak for you when you go into these negotiations. So I think, yeah, from a long-term perspective, that would be my bit of advice, because it served me well. Some of the most successful people I know in my space, their personal brand, the company brand, they really invest a lot of time in like networking, going to events, giving their time for free, helping people that are perhaps in the next level down from them, or seeking advice from the person who's in the position up. So yeah, that would be my advice, is build your community and tribe, and let them also be your cheerleaders, not just yourself, because people will do a Google of you if you go into a sales pitch.
Taz, I know you're very interested in DEI, and one of the things that I've just already touched on is that women don't earn as much as men.
I'm about to go full rage on
But why is that? Is that because we're not as good at negotiating? Do you think there's something that we can do to try and redress that balance?
Yeah, so there's obviously there's a whole, I could talk about this now. I do I do entire workshops on this, and I've done leadership training with CEOs on this and all sorts. So there's a multitude of reasons. Unfortunately, the way that the patriarchy has been weaponized is one component of it. So we do, I can share studies, if anyone wants these, just connect with me on LinkedIn, but I can share studies where we're going into blind auditions for musicians. There was like an increase of 40% of positive auditions or successful auditions with women when they turned to blind auditions. So that tells you, I worked with one of the biggest tech accelerators in the UK, and they had to artificially uplift any startups that were founded by women to account for the bias that existed in an all-male judging panel. Firstly, why didn't we get a woman on the judging panel? So that's one component of it. The bias does still exist, and the second is that one of the compounded, effects of that system that we are still trying very hard to equalize is that the confidence doesn't exist. And you can go back to, I think it's 2021, the LinkedIn survey. They do a big annual survey every year, and there's loads of different chapters that you can read if you want to nerd out like me. But they did a segment on showing like confidence rates between men and women. Majority of men, in the 90% and above, will apply for a job even if they only fit 50% of the criteria. Women, or majority of women, so north of 90%, will only apply if they fit 100% of the criteria. And there's just this massive gap in confidence. I think in terms of, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so confidence is obviously very important if you're going to negotiate, isn't it? You've got to be confident. And I guess research helps with that, doesn't it? It gives you the confidence to think that is your value.
Yeah, and I think, so that right now the government, there is a mandatory, I think you have to be over 250 people for your gender pay gap to be mandatory, to report annually. There are companies that do it without it being mandatory. My take on it is, if you're not being transparent about what men and women are being paid in your company, you're probably hiding something. So I would also, when it goes into negotiations, have a look at companies' gender pay gap, have a look at their competitors' gender pay gap, and that will tell you roughly where they sit. And this is all publicly available information if they do report on it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, that's my personal. But I'm sure you all have questions to ask this learned panel. Yes, well, shall I give the mic to Tara?
No, I'll run. Is there any questions? Yeah, here we are, Rob.
It's quite I don't need the mic, I'm quite loud. It's quite a simple question really, is what is the best outcome for a negotiation?
I mean, I would say make sure the other party feels they've won. Okay, if you can make sure they've won, then they'll feel they've got something on you.
That was the second part. Is it about winning and losing?
It's not about winning and losing, it's making them feel you've won. So even if you've got everything you want, you don't want to walk away saying, oh, I'm the winner. You want to make sure that they feel that they have won. If you could do that, then that's the best outcome.
And a question for Taz, as you mentioned about being found online, is it good or should you be easy to find online?
Depends what industry you're in. My take on it is that I don't like being in front of cameras, but what I find is that the more I put myself out there, the easier it is for people to reach me, and a lot of that inbound. So for complete transparency, my first year of freelancing I made 30 grand, second year I made north of 6 figures, and I had never freelanced in my life or even done a sales pitch like for myself, and everything inbound was recommendations, and the recommendations stemmed off the back of people saying, you should speak to Taz, here's her LinkedIn. And then them doing a quick Google search of me, and all the places I had spoken had come up, and there was suddenly this credential of I didn't need to pitch myself. So for me, I would say, depending on your industry, some industries frown upon it. They don't want you to be found online. I have friends that work as like graphic designers for Adidas, and they're on non-compete. They're not allowed to say they work for Adidas because they'll get poached by Nike and vice versa. So I would say I don't think in this day and age we can escape it. That's why.
Any more questions?
You all must have negotiated something that
They are.
I think, I'm loud as well. Someone mentioned promoters, I suppose, during a negotiation. How do you deal with detractors? I think it was you, Martyn, that sort of briefly mentioned detracting as in if you're selling to procurement and they're less keen than the person in inside.
I think that's where the advocacy bit comes in, right? Like you've got probably the person on the inside team who wants you, maybe sometimes it comes outside of that, like the marketing team, and they've heard something good that you've done. And I think it's about letting them have that conversation to the side, like, especially in a rigid process where they're like, you've been invited to this and you need to be pitching at this time, will be 20 minutes for your pitch, you've got 15 minutes Q&A, and then we'll go into a portal and we'll upload all these documents, blah, blah. I think, and they say, you never go outside of that process, but if there's a messaging bit on the portal, you can definitely just how do you think that went? Is there anything we can do better? Maybe we didn't get to that point. I think you're never going to win in that instance if that person has more power than the other person, right? But just, again, being more human at that pitch. Like, we genuinely think that we've got something to offer. If it's only about price in this instance, then we're probably not the agency for you. But that's going at it from a, probably a slightly more premium perspective. But making, I think as part of the negotiation itself, we're not doing apples for apples here, right? Like, these are the things that we're going to be adding that are different. But unless you ask the question of what they're seeing in the other proposals, or whether or not it's about price, or whether or not it's about number of groups, or survey respondents, or markets, or whatever, they're the things that I think that have to come into the conversation. And again, I'm sometimes not good at having those kind of conversations. You get a little bit like, I have to say that, but I think you absolutely can. Can I just,
Yeah. So on that, if you do have detractors, you've got to try and work out very early on if they are genuinely coming up with objections or they've got someone else in mind. Okay, so if they ask you questions and you feel you've adequately answered them, but they still are not, they're still detractors, you've got to walk away because you're never going to convince them. And even if eventually somehow you manage to win and stuff, there would always be doubts about or criticism about your output. So what we do whenever we negotiate with clients, if we have people, I can usually work out for a few questions that they've already got a supplier in mind. They're probably just going through the process, especially with large companies. I've noticed they've already got a preferred supplier. You are there because for some governance reasons they've got to have 5 other people pitching, and if you can work it out that they're just going through the motions or they're asking questions only to be seen to be critique of you, then just say, at the end of the meeting decide no more. We can't lower our price because you're not going to win. Right? So.
What do you think is your biggest? Sorry, I have to ask a question. What's your biggest when you know that's the case? Because I've definitely had that feeling myself.
So because when you, if they're on their own, it's hard. But when you've got other people who are nodding their heads, so you're sitting there. I mean, on virtual it's quite hard, but when you're in the room, you see other people are nodding their head, and that person is still not convinced. That's my biggest thing, because how is it? I mean, again, it goes back to psychology. How is it that things resonate with some people but not you consistently? And that's the thing, it's the consistent thing. If suddenly, like some questions they're not happy on, but others they are happy, then assume you've got a fair chance. But if everything is about then it's time to walk away.
Yeah, and just to add to that, sorry, because I was asking it in the same way. It's like I notice it if the research team has gone quiet, then you're like, well, they've already got something in mind. If procurement are asking questions, it's like, right, there's space for negotiation here. But actually, it's when the research people start questioning the procurement people, you're like, oh, you do still stand a chance. It's all human nuance, and it's also like, what are the goals? It's getting those out from the outset and trying to have that conversation before the process kicks off and be like, what's on the table here? Are we going for a global roster? Are we doing a single project? Is it an SOW? Are we doing an MSA? Is it blah, blah, blah? Like the rocket list of questions that constantly spin around your head, but ultimately still comes down to like asking the question a different way. Why are we here? But maybe not like that, because they won't say what.
And I guess it's also in those situations not feeling too dejected, because often we have that sort of gatekeeper there that you can't quite get past, but there are also many other people that are often involved in that decision, maybe not at that point, but this industry is small. At some point, if you've done a good job sort of in that pitch and in that situation, you don't know who's going to come around again and when that work might come back to you. So always put your best foot forward, regardless of, even if you see that you've got those barriers as well.
Okay, we have one more question just here.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura. I just have like a quick question. Thank you for all your insights. I'm currently in the job hunting for a permanent job, and sometimes I see that like employers ask for like, what is your current salary? For example, I don't know if it's normal to ask that, and is it like mandatory to put it, or because my prior job is in Latin America, so I don't know if it's comparable to put my salary, like my previous salary.
No, I wouldn't. in short. I mean, be honest about it. You haven't worked in the UK before. There's no point of comparison. What you do want to say, I think, at some point, is what your salary expectation is, but you don't have to set it out that early. That would be my thoughts. I don't know that
I see similar in recruitment now as well, and often it's an indication if you're in the same market, but if you've come from another country, then often it isn't comparable and it sometimes isn't helpful. So,
and the thing is that that box is mandatory, so there's no way to explain like that. So I don't know, it's kind of
zeros. I'm just
just
Ridiculous number.
because it's not relevant. And actually, increasingly, for DEI reasons, there is increasing pressure on companies not to ask that question. I think in parts of the States it's now illegal. Yeah. So, you know, there's no way that...
Just switch the, what's your current salary? You mean what's my desired salary? I'm happy to share that because there's, like you said, it's illegal in parts of America, and I wish it was illegal here because the only reason they'd be asked, if the argument is a recruiter is asking you what salary you're on to make sure the role fits your current salary, why not just disclose what the salary is and you can say that's not within my ballpark? So for me, the onus has to be on the organisations, and I'm probably going to ruffle a few feathers, ex-recruiter here as well. But I think at no point should you disclose it, because I've been in rooms where, unfortunately, people have said, oh, well, the banding for this goes up to 70k, but she's currently on 50, let's just put her on 55 or 60. And that can be really damaging. So under no circumstance are you legally obliged to disclose it. And if they're being that arsy about it, do you really want to work for a company like that? That's my take on it, which I know is, again, ruffling feathers, but I'm just...
We're all from the same industry.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I've been on both sides. So when someone's asked me for my salary, I've you know, if they're asking, you've got to ask them informally somehow, why do you need to know, okay? And then if they're like, oh, we need to benchmark you something, then you're like, but I'm applying for a role that I expect this to be paid. Because otherwise I'd be on my same role, right? I'd be doing, you know, for this salary, this is what I do, but because I'm applying for your role, I'd expect to be paid this much. There's no point taking on promotion or more responsibility for less pay, okay? The second thing is on the employer side, I have noticed that, so especially with women, you create your own boundaries. That's one of the things I've noticed, so especially in the analytics and data science space, where women, whenever I've sort of interviewed or done sort of pay rise and promotion negotiations, you sort of set your own boundaries, and luckily I'm quite open-minded and not narrow and part of the patriarchy, hopefully. I try to promote, but don't set your own boundaries, okay? It's not for you to set the boundaries, okay? So as an employer, we're all human, right? So if I had a salary band up to 70 and someone said they're on 50, automatically I'd be like, well, I can't give them a 20 grand jump. I'll go down, okay? So for me, what I should be doing is at the end of the interview, assessing where I want to place you. So if I do genuinely then say, oh, you know, my banding is between 50 and 70 and you're at 50, then that's for you to negotiate and reject, say I'm worth more. But if I put you at 70 and you're happy, then I'm happy because that's the price or the salary I've put forward based on my interview, my assessment of you, okay? I can't then complain and say, oh, you didn't tell me you're on 50 grand. It's like, that's the value I've placed for my company, therefore we're both happy. And it's very rare that employers, trust me, if they want to go back and renegotiate and rehire someone, it's tens of thousands. Don't believe them, okay? Whenever you are in a final point of negotiating a job, they're not going to back off. Unless they've got like multiple second choices, they're not going to back off. Because if you drop out, they're going right from the beginning again. Because very good candidates go off the market. And so they're going back, they're going to go through the whole process, and it's going to cost tens of thousands. It's not cheap.
Yeah, I just want to say 2 quick scenarios and then I'll shut up, I promise. From a personal experience, being introduced to a company who didn't have a role that quite fit what I wanted, I was able to use that evidence folder that I told you about, the screenshots, the testimonials, what other people about me in the industry were saying, and use that to negotiate a brand new job description with the salary that I wanted to fit into what the company were building. And similarly, my husband, who's sat in this room today, was applying for a role. They would not disclose the salary, and then when they got to the final stages, they were so impressed with his background, and I said, just push for an extra 10k, and he was like, they're not going to give it. I was like, just push. Just do it. I'm telling you, worst case, they're going to say no. You're willing to accept that salary anyway. They went all the way back to the American team, HQ team, and then they basically renegotiated and said, well, it's against our policy to pay for this role above that, but we'll give you the 10k as a sign-on bonus. So they'll find a way because they were afraid to lose him.
There's always a budget.
There's always a budget, because to go back to that process, so many people in recruitment in here as well, we know that it's such an expensive thing to go back and start afresh.
So if someone's going to offer genuinely that value to the business, why would you not do it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
There is one.
Hi, it's Tim Raglan from North Star. I'm looking outside, and I'm looking at the men's, I'm massive into cricket, so I'm looking at the Oval Invincibles team, and in their starting 11, there's 2 17-year-olds and 1 16-year-old. Now I see a lot about, oh, you need at least 3 years of experience for this job. You need 5 years experience for this job. But a lot of people around here work in account management and sales, and they might be very, very good, but have only worked there for 18 months. And suddenly their salary band is nowhere near enough, their company's not willing to jump it up by what they're achieving on their KPIs, their bonus structure might not be good enough. What do you say to them? Because I imagine recruiters would go, oh sorry, this is a sales director role, you've only been at your job for X amount of years, you ain't getting in, sort of thing, and the discussion's kind of closed, you go, you kind of feel a bit stuck. I'm just wondering if you've got any sort of response to that.
I'm going to ruffle feathers, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot of people rightly are shying away from saying the amount of years experience now. There are still some people that do it because people are starting to recognise the fact that yes, you can miss out on some really good people that way because yes, they may not have had that many years experience in that particular role, but many of these skills they may have gathered in other roles can be very relevant and they're great people. So I don't think that it should be the case. Unfortunately, it is a lot of the time.
I think we're moving away from it. I think as a society we are very narrow-minded and to some extent ageist, and let's face it, when you're asking about years of experience, what you're really checking out is how old they are. But I think increasingly companies are becoming aware that that is a very narrow way of looking at things. I don't know how you get around it, but unless we all sort of think about it. But companies should be looking for what you can offer, not how long you've been offering it for. Because the important thing is, you know, what can you do?
And you can achieve that in a short space of time.
Yeah, you can.
I was going to say.
And right at the other end of the scale, it's a big problem. Because people have got masses of years of experience and then they're instantly discounted just as the junior people are. And yet, obviously, they can still offer certain things.
And you talk about like budget being available, like for a smaller company sometimes there isn't always budget available, right? But what I will always do when I'm putting out the job spec is if you see yourself within this role and you're not quite at that level, or you're just an interesting and passionate person, just get in touch. I think that's the open offer that I can do, so let's have a conversation about it, because I would rather have somebody who gives a shit than somebody who just wants the money and wants to come in and do it, because you're doing a multifaceted role at all times, and I think the most important thing is just having people who care, and people are fun to work with, right? There's plenty of smart people out there. There's also a lot of idiots out there. And I can't be betting my TVs on idiots, but I can be saying, like, you're not much fun, you know? Like,
I think that's a really good point, actually, as a way of overcoming it. Show how passionate you are about something, how passionate you are about that job, how passionate you are about that company.
And I would also, sorry to add to that, is if you see a company advertise their role, that's kind of a holdout, and you think, oh, I'm not quite that experience. Find in the competitive set somebody who might not even be hiring for that role, but you like the look of the business, and just send them an email and be like, hey, I really like the cut of your gym. I'm quite good at my job. I'd like to do that for you. It's worked for me in the past.
And even in a short space of time, the sort of mentoring that for the previous companies I've worked with that we've done with young people, it's also simple, like a change of words on your CV. If you're a young person, you've only got like a year's experience or 2 years. My far left suggestion is remove the year you graduated from your LinkedIn and watch how things change. Just remove that year because they can't guess your age based off the back of that. They might guess off years of experience, but usually people tend to, you might have just changed industry. So I've removed teaching from my LinkedIn, because I did that for 5 years. Started that 15 years ago. So people make the assumption that I graduated just 10 years, I wish that I graduated just 10 years ago, but I didn't. So, but it's a simple wording change. So rather than saying like, I don't know, what's a really quick example I can think of? Think of the actual value and the numbers and outputs that you created in that job in a short space of time, whatever the job is. So if it was like contributing to a team, you could say, even though you weren't leading the team. So I'll give you an example. One of the companies I worked for in talent, we started off, when I went there, we were 30 people, we were 90 by the end. I helped make 3 internal hires, but didn't hire everyone. Rather than saying, I was part of a company that scaled, I said I contributed to the tripling of the headcount of this team, And then we opened in Malaysia and Singapore and so on and so office. It's just changing the wording, because there's no way you've been somewhere for a year or 2 years and haven't added any venue. But yeah, it's just a bit crap that we're still so ageist on both ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
Lovely. Was there any more questions from anyone? No? Wonderful. Well, I think that kind of wraps us up on time. I feel like I need to make a little disclaimer here that if there is any conversations or any salary negotiations happening, I will not be held accountable for. Okay? So just wanted to put that out there. So thank you once again to our wonderful panelists.